To start today's program, we have, via the miracle of pre-recorded video, because unfortunately Tiffany, well, unfortunately for us, but fortunately for Tiffany, she's at Paris Fashion Week right now in Paris. I conducted a conversation with Tiffany. She's the head of content at Vogue Japan, a really extraordinary thinker, maker, enabler in fashion. You'll learn more about her as we get into the conversation. In 2007, Tiffany wrote a book called Style Deficit Disorder about the Harajuku style fashion at the time. And so our conversation is really about how fashion, media, temporality, memory are sort of ricocheting off each other right now. So even though Tiffany isn't with us in the room, I would still appreciate it if we gave Tiffany Godoy a warm welcome and if we could play the video. Thank you very much. Thanks for joining us today from Tokyo all the way to Dubai and the metaverse as well. Beautiful background.
Thank you.
So I've got a number of questions that I've been wanting to ask you for a very, very long time in relation to this topic of ours called predicting the present. But just to start things off, because I'm always interested in origin myths, I wanted to ask you, what is your very first fashion memory?
I think it was when I went to the mall. I'm from Los Angeles, so we like to go to the mall. I went to the mall and I went to a bookstore, and I remember finding this book called O Rio de Janeiro by Bruce Weber. And I don't know if I knew it was even a fashion moment, but I knew it was just a book full of really beautiful people wearing clothes in most images, not all.
Not all.
Yeah, so I think in retrospect, it was like my first fashion moment that I didn't realize was a fashion moment.
I'm curious because I've been thinking about this a lot recently. I mean, Hans Ulrich would call these epiphanies, no? They're sort of discoveries. They're discoveries of things, but they're also discoveries of aspects of yourself that you didn't know, no? And they fuel your future, things like that. But I'm sort of curious, what was that sensational feeling looking at that Bruce Weber book that maybe set you off on a path in the rest of your life?
Yeah, I think, that book in particular, there's a kind of a narrative that runs through it via pictures. And I don't think I've seen anything like that before. And it looks like images from a fashion magazine, but it was a book. And I think it was also very sexy. So there may be something in that. But yeah, I think this like sense of narrative and there was this cinematic feeling to it.
Amazing. So, over to this theme that I've developed for the Global Art Forum called Predicting the Present. I was curious, I wanted to ask you whether you think fashion today is more a reflection of the past, the present, or the future, or whether fashion invents its own sense of time.
It's funny. I think if you look at content that's being put out by younger people on, TikTok, for example, I feel like it's very nostalgic coming from my eyes, right? So it's all about archives. And I think, I see especially a lot of people interested in Japanese, like printed archives and using like Google Translate to try to figure out what's being, what was written. So in my eyes as a vintage person, I see a lot of nostalgia or just, digging the crates and excitement around fashion moments, whether those are McQueen fashion shows, Hussein Chalayan. And I think even, young designers are also looking at that and slightly reinventing it. But there's a lot of odes to masters of a certain time, which is kind of the millennium, late 90s, 2000s, when I started my career. So I think it's very backward looking in a lot of ways, right? So, and a lot of sampling and a lot of just showing what you found, look at this, look at this, without context or own, credits or things like this. So very much looking back in some ways. And in other ways, we had the announcement of Pharrell Williams as the creative director of Louis Vuitton Men's, which is something that's never happened before. Fashion as a cultural driver, clothes as a support system, though made with an atelier that's based on craftsmanship and savoir-faire. So that's a kind of a new mix.
And just on that question about, I'm also always very interested in innovation. Paco Rabanne just passed away. You're wearing Courrèges. The interesting thing, often when one looks at these accounts that are archives that look back, you look at Paco Rabanne or Pierre Cardin from the 60s or Courrèges from the 60s, and those things still look more futuristic than most things today. Where are we in terms of innovation? Has innovation kind of, I don't know, is it losing a battle to nostalgia and kind of thinking about the past?
Yeah, I think, it's more about what a brand has become. Clothing is it's part of the story, part of the expression, part of one interface. And not everyone, and so I think, luxury has expanded and there's more and more attention being put on it from, people at a younger age, especially in the US, for example, whereas like when I was growing up, it was very remote. It wasn't part of my culture at all, but whereas in Japan, since the 70s, it's really been, everyone in the middle class had a Louis Vuitton wallet, for example. So I think that there's innovation in the way that brands are experienced. I think, and we find, and then in terms of the materials of clothing and potentially also ways of producing things, I think there's some innovations and there's more information and, but I think the way that brands have evolved is quite innovative, right? So they've become more than just artisans but their cultures, their medias. So I think it's innovative.
Yeah, and sorry to interrupt, but that actually leads us into my next question. So there's a recent saying which says, everything is content today. Does fashion need to be content today to succeed? And do fashion brands need to be media companies to thrive?
I think there's a really strong appeal towards brands like the Row, for example, or that is very quiet and that's quite seductive now. And for people even that aren't very, very wealthy, I think there's this allure to this quietness. And let's see what Phoebe Philo does. This is a big question, right? How is she going to navigate this moment? Who's someone who's very private? How will she navigate this new system? Will she do collections, et cetera, et cetera? So I don't think that's essential. I think if you know who you're talking to, I think there's a big interest in quality and also uniqueness.
Yeah. So we were just saying before we had hit record that you've been in your job now for just over a year as head of editorial content at Vogue Japan. And I believe that you came on board as part of a kind of global restructuring by Condé Nast, by Anna Wintour, of the Vogue empire, thinking about the 21st century. I was wondering if you could tell us how, in an age of digital and screen everything, print fashion magazines continue to hold significance. And would it be fair to say that Japan continues to have a strong relationship to printed matter?
I think we talked about media, brands as more than just, selling clothing. They're selling dreams, they're selling, they're communicating and stuff. And I think what's interesting about Vogue now is more about the power of the brand and what it symbolizes, right? So I think, and then plus you add in all of these potential story makers from around the world that are contributing and exchanging ideas across territories. And of course, some work in some territories and not others. And so it's really a fascinating continuous dialogue and it's somewhat of an experiment. And I think that right now, what was the second part of the question?
It was whether there's a particular relationship that the Japanese still have to print it material and print it.
Yeah, definitely. I think right now Vogue Japan has a really strong, we print 12 times a year, and a very important part of our a very important platform. It's not the only platform. I'm really creating an ecosystem where some of the content and web goes into print as more of an archive, and vice versa. So it's really exciting for me to use all of these different tools and moments and figuring out what plugs into what first. So paper is still very important here for young people. It's very, I just had amazing applications from like we had the most applications for interns like since forever, and they talked about how much they love print and that they buy print.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
I mean, it's also interesting in relation to what you're saying about the past, the present, and the future. But and I believe that I mean the factories that produce vinyl records can't keep up with demand anymore. So progress is never linear, I think, right? Yes. It's often circular in that sense. I wanted to ask, your next question was really about, the sort of digitization of everything. And we've been hearing a lot about digital fashion. And I'm curious whether you see this as something really taking off for consumers, or whether it's going to be, a little bit like VR headsets, a technology that seems really interesting, but that struggles to find mass mainstream adoption.
I think it was we saw just the first phase of digital fashion and with NFTs, and obviously from when NFTs first got a bit of traction to when you started working with them, a lot of different types of people got involved. And I think virtual fashion or images created by AI now are you're seeing really incredible imagery, and it's just the beginning. So it's still early. I do think that we spend so much time online that there's got to be some kind of way to connect. I think as technology evolves, and this is like, on a monthly basis, the type of virtual fashion or how you use it, what it symbolizes or what it's connected to will evolve. So I still think something there in terms of fashion or like fashionability and then accessibility to it. I think those are the two things that maybe for people that are here, watching this, maybe those are two factors that are, not quite there yet. So I'm still optimistic that there will be an evolution that could be a bit sexier.
It's funny because in my feed at the moment, every other image is somebody wearing the new red Mischief Astro Boy boots. And in a way, this is very interesting because it's technically not digital fashion, they're real boots, but it's operating effectively as digital fashion. I mean, it's got this like viral meme-like quality to it. And so there's something interesting there.
I mean, they're also playing with the idea of a fashion victim. You know what I mean? Like, are you going to wear these boots? Like, I think they're laughing. I mean, these guys are brilliant. And
they're brilliant.
It's one big practical joke.
Yeah.
Right.
Actually, you mentioned NFTs, and I wanted to ask you, so decentralization has been a big driver of Web3, cryptocurrencies, and NFTs. Do you think there's any interest in the fashion world and for fashion to be decentralized? Or, to think about it the other way, one could also say, well, fashion is very, it's a huge multi-billion-dollar industry, hundreds of billions of dollars probably. And because of that, it actually tends towards centralization.
Yes.
So does
does fashion,
Yeah.
can it dream of disrupting itself, and what would that disruption be?
I think fashion is also just about accessibility and attainability. And, for example, if you get something for free, you don't always treat it as well as something maybe you paid money for, right? And I think also the more you slap a logo, so if you give everyone access to your logo, it lowers the whole quality of or the symbolism of what it is, or that selectivity dies because it's everywhere. So I think it serves a purpose in some ways, but I still think at the same time, it's also about building community. So it's, it's it's like a cat and mouse thing, maybe. So I think that as time goes by and the more that everyone is able to create images via AI or Photoshop or whatever, or make, movies on TikTok. And I think the more that we do value things that have heritage, that are really well made, or have a really clear message, and are consistent.
Yeah. So, Tiffany, that was our 15 minutes of fame. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate you taking the time, but also answering my questions so generously and innovatively. So for now, it's good evening, Tokyo.